Welcome everybody to CFP Talks episode 3. I'm Joe Nissim. I am the lead instructor and subject matter expert at Nissim Tutoring. With me, as always, is my friend and former student, Mr. David Fuchs, coming live to us from Jersey City. And today we are going to talk about the number one mistake that CFP students make, and that is underestimating the magnitude of the CFP exam. So, David, I know this is near and dear to your heart. It's obviously near and dear to mine. This is something that I deal with on a regular basis. And what I want to really get into today is why this happens and how to avoid it, because this is a huge mistake that people make. And it's really bothersome to me because I have worked with some very, very bright students that end up failing the exam, not because they're not smart enough, but because they underestimate the size of the exam and the intensity of the exam, and it ends up destroying their confidence. And here's the situation that ends up happening. And we saw it with actually one of your classmates that did it. Even within the program, this tends to happen. So this, just because you're inside of a CFP review program doesn't necessarily mean that you're properly estimating the exam. And what ends up happening is you're very, very bright or you're a good test taker, or, I passed the series 7 in a really quick amount of time, or I was really good at this stuff in college, or I'm a quick learner, or I built my own practice, and if I can build my own practice and raise kids, I can do anything. And that is the most common misconceptions of somebody coming in and taking this exam, where you go, yeah, it's just a test, I can do it. In reality, this is really different. This is a different skill set. It is a different discipline. Now, David, somebody who's just taken it this year, and you work a job, an intense job, you've played sports, talk about some of your misconceptions coming into the exam as to maybe ways that you underestimated the exam and why you thought that.
Well, I think you just nailed it on the head with one thing you just said, and that a lot of people think it's, quote unquote, just an exam.
Yeah.
That I think kind of encapsulates why some people, if they don't pass, and the reason they didn't pass is because they underestimated it, is because it's not the Series 7. It's not an exam in college where you can, there was plenty of times in college where I didn't go to class one time and stayed up the entire night the night before and passed the exam. Plenty. Series 7, a little bit tougher, but you need 3 weeks to a month. You take some practice exams, you read some textbooks. Most people end up being fine.
Doable.
It's very doable. And even like some other things, like any type of exam or activity or accomplishment that you can do kind of on autopilot. This is not that. This is kind of something where you need to put in a lot more planning, a lot more, I would say, effort. And it's just a different type of exam that you need to prepare for. And I'm sure you and I are going to talk a little bit about that more coming up, but that's the difference.
Yeah. And I'll say, like, my study period for CFP was 18 months. I went to an in-person class. It took me, 18 months to do it. We had, I think it was 6 classes that stretched 3 months each, which gets us to the 18-month. And then and only at that point was I eligible for the exam, which is the same process as it is now.
Right.
However, that you can do it in a shorter period of time. Even going through the classes, I was really arrogant about, I can get to know this information. I just need to get through this class.
Right, exactly.
Were you in the same boat?
Pretty relatively similar. And I think a lot of people come in and have that same mentality. And even like putting, you going through an 18-month course, I think some people, they've rushed through the education part if they're doing it, self-study. I did it self-study, and I'll be honest, I didn't learn almost anything during like the education course. And like when Yeah,
Yeah.
when I was doing like the modules and even the financial plan, like if I took the course, if I took the exam after going through just the straight up education portion, I would think the percentage of questions that I got right would have been like 20%.
Yeah.
And and then you start the prep.
Yeah.
And that's when it gets really serious.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest difference between studying for just your again a college or a series exam and then going after this exam. You need to, again, we said it 1,000 times, but it's a different type of study. And some people think, oh, I can just do it over the month. I kind of know this stuff. And it's just a multiple choice exam,
Yeah.
right?
But can I tell you what drives me nuts? Like even
I
for
love
myself, even if I for myself, here it is. If I just have a little bit more time and I sit down with the material, I'll be able to pass the test.
that's what
That,
people say.
yes, that is the biggest lie that everybody tells themselves, is that if I sit down with it a little bit more, but because you go through the modules and you're like, yeah, nothing on the surface seems that hard. And in the education, they're literally giving you the easiest surface level questions because you've paid X amount of dollars. And a
Exactly.
lot of times, if you're doing it in college or your firm is paying for it, they don't want to fail people.
No, no, exactly. And that's just, it's a bad look for the services if somebody doesn't get through the education portion of it.
That's
They-
right.
So
Exactly.
getting through the education portion, people think, I got through the education in 6 months. I know some people that did it in 2 months. You
Yeah.
just click through the slideshow. And
You're clicking next, 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 next. And then you're like, okay, I'm ready for the exam. And you're like, no, you're not.
right.
Right.
And yeah, like you said, those services, Dalton, Kaplan, Wiley, whoever else, Dank, Boston, they're not going to not have you pass through the education portion.
Right. Which lures you into this false sense of confidence that you're kind of actually ready for the exam. And then the moment it hits you is usually the second that you take a first practice exam and score like a 40 and are scratching your head because most of the questions don't even look remotely familiar.
Right.
I
And
remember that being the case for me. What did you
well, I was
what
going
did
to
you experience?
no, that's the same exact thing, and that's a huge misconception. Is that you go through the module, you read like 2 or 3 sentences on a topic, and then what happens is then you start prepping for the exam, and you start doing questions. And I remember getting questions when I was going through prep that I was like, "Are they sure that's on the exam?" Like I
Yeah.
don't remember seeing that in the
Yeah.
textbook or on the module, and that's another thing that hits you like a ton of bricks when you start prepping for the exam.
I think the most disheartening thing is like studying for something like estate planning, which was, I worked in investment planning or investments. I worked at Morgan Stanley, which was Smith Barney at the time before Morgan Stanley bought it. But so for the investment part, I felt more comfortable that my degree was in finance. So I kind of was like, okay, I got the investment stuff down. Where I really got to I got to sit down with the material is estate planning. And I
Yeah.
remember reading them something like the marital deduction. I'm like, okay, that's it. It's an
Right.
unlimited passing between spouses. Cool. What's the hard part? And then you get your first question, and the question is a paragraph long and then says, what is the best use of the marital deduction? And I literally
Right.
wanted to just cry because I'm like, I have no idea.
And you probably didn't even understand the answers that you had a choice between.
I didn't even understand anything.
Right.
So, and I know a lot of people, a lot of people who are coming in to see me. And if you're in this boat and you're going, holy crap, I had no clue. A lot of the education portion of it is kind of luring you into this false sense of confidence. And especially if you do it over a long period of time, you don't remember if GPP was hard for you. You don't remember if investments was particularly hard. You're just trying to get through. You're clicking the next button, whether you're doing it in person or not. I remember my estate planning professor was this attorney who would come in. He tried to be cool. He would like wear a beret and had this big long beard and would like tell us about his day and how, his clients loved him and he was, changing the world. And like nobody cared. Nobody really wanted to be there. We just kind of wanted to come in and do what we needed to do and get the hell out. And I remember when I got my review materials and I looked at how thick it was, I was so overwhelmed. I was so overwhelmed. And so if you're sitting and you're in this boat and you're going, I don't really know how to plan for the exam, or you're coming into like what's happening today, which is I've had more people reach out to me in the last week than I have in the last 3 months for the November exam. Today's September 30th. We're recording this on September 30th. The exam is in the first date that you can take it is November 1st. The last date you can take it is November 8th. And people are reaching out because they've hit this part where they're like, I just finished the reading and now I'm starting to do some questions and I'm going to see more and more of this. What do I do?
Yeah.
So what I would tell people, and David, what would you tell people now being on the other side of it? You've taken this exam this year, so you're not that far removed. How would you tell people to kind of approach this, or what is your best piece of advice for people to approach this?
Well, kind of piggybacking off what you just said, I'm like surprised just because I went through the process, but that's having 2020, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
Knowing what I know now, I would never have been comfortable waiting till a month out to start doing questions and to then potentially reach out to, someone for help, whether it's, one of the services or you or whoever. Um, I think I know, you need to come in knowing that you need to give yourself a good 3 to 4 months before the exam to really start prepping and start getting yourself ready for the exam. You really, a common misconception, and clearly, people who've reached out to you, kudos to them for like looking for help, but coming a month out and saying, hey, I don't understand a lot of this stuff and the questions are really tough. It's going to be tough a month out. And not to discourage anybody, but it's going to be tough a month out to, start to get comfortable with a lot of these things if you're not at a point already. If it's like, hey, it's a month out and there's a couple things I need to touch up on, that's totally fine. But if you want to start like prepping the way you should be prepping, you can't start it a month out. You need to start it. I think 3 month minimum, but I think 4 months is more appropriate for a majority of the people taking the exam.
Yeah. So I'm gonna give everybody kind of the secret to this first and foremost. Number one, you have to acknowledge how massive this exam is. There is 70 topics, 70 topics on this exam that they can potentially test you on. Okay. Now there's 170 questions on the exam. So that's, 2 1/3 questions per topic. But obviously that's not the way it breaks down. They're gonna not test some topics and test others more heavily. So you have to be prepared for anything. So I think the first thing is going in and going, I know this exam is big and I know I need to be prepared for anything. So now I need to plan accordingly. Okay, that's number one. So accept how big the exam is and accept that no matter how smart you are, this exam does not discriminate by how smart you are. This exam is a matter of discipline and preparation, not by intelligence, because I've known a lot of very smart people who have failed this test that shouldn't have failed this test, but they just didn't plan for it properly. Number two, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That I'm sorry to cut you off, but that to me, that point right there is probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
That everybody listening should take home.
Okay.
Point number one.
Point
Go.
number, okay. Well, let's see if we can top it with point number two. I'm dropping wisdom today. Little nuggets of gold. Okay, number two. No matter how long you think you're going to have to study, you got to add a minimum of 20 to 30% as a buffer. And here's the reason why. One, you're going to get stuck on topics you thought that you were going to be able to get through quickly and easily, and it's going to take you an extra 2 to 3 days. And that'll happen with probably a dozen topics that you kind of went, yeah, I got that, but then you actually get questions on it, and then you don't got that, and you need a little bit of extra time, and you don't want to be crunching. Number two, you're going to have work stuff that comes up. You're going to have life stuff that comes up. You're going to have family things that come up. You need to plan for that and work around it instead of just going, I'm going to have 60 days to study with zero buffer. I'm going to sit there every weekend. Three, no cramming. It doesn't work for an exam of this magnitude. You can kind of get away with it for some FINRA exams. It's not ideal, but you can get away with it. You can get away with it in college. You can get away with it in a lot of things in your life. The CFP will not let you get away with cramming because it's an applicative exam. You can't just memorize a bunch of stuff for 30 days and then go in and take the test. It's just not that type of test. So acknowledge the mass that the exam is, and then be a master planner by building in buffers, because stuff is going to come up. It's just a matter, can you work around it? So there needs to be masterful planning. If you don't know how to do that, then that's the time that you reach out and you get help. And then thirdly, okay, and this is the most important thing, is, are you ready? Are you ready for the last nugget?
I'm really interested to hear this, how it's going to top number one for me, at least.
It's harder than you think.
Okay.
Okay. And here's the reason why. I was great at investment planning, right? It was what I studied in finance. I knew CAPM, I knew normal distribution, I knew how to do dividend discount model. I could do that stuff in my sleep. Now mix it in with 142 other questions. Now I'm starting to question whether I know investment planning. This exam will take you down, whether it is academically or from a stamina standpoint. So it is going to be harder than you think it is. It's not just some test that you can kind of walk into and take. So underestimating the exam is the biggest mistake that people make. I urge you to be an incredible planner. And if you don't know how to do that, get some help, because there's no way around it. Don't be the person that underestimates and tries to cram. And here's the last thing, and I'm going to leave you guys with this. If you're taking off the last week to study and cram, and you're going to study 8 hours a day, you've done something horribly wrong. Your last week should be focusing on sleep, doing flashcards, chilling out, recovering from that study period. That is the proper way to do it. There is a right way to study and a wrong way to study. And guess what? You can study the wrong way and still pass this test. So if you're watching this video and you're going, well, Joe has no idea what he's talking about. I did it that way and I passed. Sure. Again, if you sit there and you study 160 hours in a month, then you can do that. But most people cannot do that, and nor do you want to do that. It's miserable. It is a complete miserable and a complete waste of time, because most of you guys who are taking this want to carry this information into your careers and use it. If you're going to invest time and money and effort, you might as well do it the right way. So do this the right way, because if you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I'm taking a week off or 2 weeks off and I'm just going to study 8 hours a day, it doesn't work. That is my closing nugget.
Yeah, and I like it's harder than you think, and then your first point was spot on. I think that's most important. And what you just said about the last week, just for a real life example, I didn't even study the last week. to be honest. Just that, and that was due to, not to, to give myself a little pat on the back, that was due to good planning and knowing, having expectations coming in the 3 or 4 months before. I didn't study the week before. I got a lot of rest. I worked out. I ate healthy. I remember I actually didn't drink at all a
Yeah.
month before the exam. I wanted to clear my body
Yeah.
of any possible poison. And I didn't eat any fried chicken, no fries. And I love that stuff too. My first meal after the exam was Chick-fil-A because I hadn't had that in a month.
Never had
Um,
Chick-fil-A in my life. I know.
that's
I know. It warrants that reaction. It's deserved.
that's yeah. But no, those are all great points. And again, you know, misconceiving the exam is a big downfall for a lot of people.
And David, just tell everybody, because we talked about this, prior to the exam, and you wanted to study that week, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't really let you. I'm like, you gotta submit to the process because we've done all the heavy lifting. And kudos to you for listening and not letting that voice in your head go and get you to that point. But those are things that you and I had talked about, and I just kind of and leave everybody with this nugget.
Yeah.
Good does it feel to walk into an exam fresh?
It's good, and it's good when you get halfway through, because another misconception, I don't want to get into a whole other thing, but a misconception is the fatigue that sets in on exam day
Right.
and how much stamina you need to build up. But that we could talk about that another time. But when you walk in and you're 85 questions in and you're halfway through and you feel like, and I texted this to you, I remember halfway through the exam, I was like, it's tough. I was like, but I could skate with them until the buzzer.
Yep.
That's key. That is so key. More important than even knowing about a B trust or the marital deduction. I think that's more important
Yep.
than knowing certain topics. And again, goes back to, that's a misconception that people don't really know going into the exam.
Awesome. Well, everybody, we hope this was informative. We hope you take something away from it. David, thank you as always for being with me today. And we will see you guys on our next episode. Take care, everybody.